All right, ladies and gents, four-person panel today for the Cronulla Sharks. We got Corey, who was on the other day. We have Heath in the middle there, and we have Scoop. So all guys that are in the private group. And if you are interested in that, all the details are in the description, which will be plenty of fun this year. Looking forward to it all. We still probably have a couple of weeks to go before the app is open and the game's open. We're all hanging on for it, but make sure you get in, learn about all the teams, learn about the players as quickly as you can. So then when the game is open, you can then focus just on creating your team, which will be good fun. So welcome in, fellas. And we have the Sharks, which is going to be a very interesting potential top four team. And their draw to start the year is very enticing, considering they don't have a bye all the way through until that first minor bye. So if they're a non-origin guy, they play in that first major bye, which is awesome to see. And Corey, what are your thoughts on that draw for the Sharkies to kick off the year?
Yeah, like you said, mate, pretty enticing draw, and the fact that they don't have a buy right up until like Magic Round, I think that's awesome. Yeah, 100%. A couple of players there that are definitely interesting.
Yeah, Penrith first up, hey, it's gonna be a fun one. Hey, Heath.
Yeah, always get the nice cards. I think we've drawn them a few times actually lately when they've been in force. I think this might be the second or third time we've played them first game up. So good test for us, I think.
Yeah, and Heath is our resident Sharkies fan. But Scoop, what do you think of putting all this together? What do you think of the Sharks overall, and yeah, that draw, and then potentially some of the players to kick things off?
I think this is a year where they decide if they're going to peak or not because they've got very soft draws the last few years. And fantasy wise, it's an interesting looking draw with the buys and stuff. But overall, it's a little bit harder than it has been in previous years. So I think we will see uh, potentially a battle hardened Sharkies going into finals instead of maybe losing a couple of tough matches they don't have as much experience with the last few years. I'm really interested to see if they can step up and fight it out with the big boys this year.
Yeah, even just looking at the start there, like my Cowboys could be a little bit on the downslide, but they've still got plenty of good players. And yeah, Penrith first up, which is always fun for our attacking players. South will be better this year. Canterbury are getting even better. Canberra always a hard little battle there. So it's a nice clean run of games, but yeah, maybe the quality of teams they're coming up against will be a little bit more difficult. But Heath, we'll kick it off with you, mate, with Kale Iro. He said you reckon he might have a little bit of sneaky value on that 46 average last year. Tell us a little bit about the split of the two halves of the year for him.
Yeah, so I've had a quick look into some of our players and some of our stats from last year. Nothing too much, just sort of the major ones that you'd sort of see as being fantasy relevant. And having a look at Euro, I know second year syndrome probably scares a lot of people off, and it normally would for me as well too. But his development throughout that year, he averaged 46.4 throughout the year, but only had one try in his first 14 games. And the Sharks were a little bit depleted through injuries and trying to get their structure together. As we sort of get to the end of the year, he's got five in his last seven. And Sharks are very dangerous with their outside backs in terms of scoring. And it seems like he was starting to get a little bit more involved and moved up to a 55.6 average, which is nearly 10 points on what he's averaged for the year, which is already a really solid score for a centre. So I think if you can get sort of anywhere from 50 plus for a centre, and lock him in for the start of the year, I think he might present some great value, especially considering he doesn't have that buy until round 13.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose the movement from Nico Hines' ball to a mixture between him and Braden Trindle pushed him a little bit further left, I think, and then a bit of luck as well. But Scoop,
Yeah.
the Trindle Hines combination, this is going to be a massive talking point for us to begin the year. Hines was much more expensive to begin last year, and coming in at a 61 instead of a mid to high 60s average. Where do you see both him and Trindle? You've got them in the yellow and the blue there.
Yeah, this is going to be one that could change a lot throughout the year or just suddenly flick one way or the other, and you'll have to keep up with it. But we saw Hines kind of lose a lot of confidence in the second half of the year and really get overshadowed by Trindle, who stepped up, took goals, a few things like that. So he is priced at 61 and he can still score really well. Um, but I do want to see, probably coming into the season in trials, I want to see that taking the ball on. I want him to be running the show more than Trindle and taking those kick meters back. Because if he can do that, yeah, he's up again there with Cleary, 65, 70 average, potential discount. If not, then I think he's going to fall back into that bracket of some of the best halves that aren't Cleary. So, like probably Hughes, Daly Cherry Evans, Moses, that type of bracket, which is really sad because we love Hynes and we love his fantasy scoring. I'm very interested to see whether the Trindle cat is out of the bag and stays that way, or whether Hynes really takes this team by the scruff of the neck and tries to lead them to a premiership.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Corey, when you're looking at halves pairings, we saw last year, Jamal Fogarty being the lead guy. So now that you see Trindle kind of taking a little bit more or splitting that role, does that push you away from combinations like that? It's probably hard to say because some of them work, Cleary and Luai. Is this one you feel that maybe doesn't work?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. It's like they're both well, to be honest, I think Hines is probably more of a six than what Trindle is, like going off the last couple of years. Like when Trindle was playing seven, he was absolutely braining it. And we've all seen that Hines he's just lacks that little bit of confidence, when it comes to the crunch, he seems to just sort of fall off a little bit.
Mm.
And was it like last year before, he was really consistent, high scoring right up until it's got to finals or until they had a tough game, and then he'd just fall off. Um, so yeah, I think it'll be a watch for me. If Cleary's fit, I'm obviously, I think a lot of coaches are just going to lock that in and then pivot, I suppose. But yeah, it's a tough one, I think.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing there as well. If Cleary isn't available, then will people actually turn to Hines or will they go cheaper in the halfback slot? And Heath, our resident Sharks fan, mate, what do you think about the situation between those two and how it's going to work fantasy wise and then for the Sharks in general?
Well, I remember messaging you last year with the injury worries about him starting the year, and I said I think I've just got to risk it because I love seeing him play. Especially being a Sharkies fan, it's a nice little point of difference sometimes to Cleary too. He does also seem to start his years off a little bit better than he ends them. As some people might say, he gets that state of origin curse and seems to go downhill and loses that confidence. But sometimes the start of the year is when he plays his best football and when the Sharks really come and click into gear. However, I do tend to agree that it's a bit of a gamble with that changing role and not really knowing how much Trindle's there to take over. And based off what we saw last year, I may leave it myself this year.
And as you're saying, to begin the year last year, he actually well outscored Cleary, and obviously Cleary did get injured in round 3, but prior to that, he was the better scorer, and then everyone flocked to Nico. So he could easily still be that guy. But yeah, when you're looking at risk versus reward for that price point, you could probably just push to a gun mid or something like that has a little bit more safety. And speaking of mids, let's get into their forward packs, their middles there. And Adam Fanua-Blake comes over in the signing of the year, in my opinion. I suppose Warriors could say, oh, we've got a great signing back as well. They probably don't change too much, a little bit different player, but in terms of leadership and everything like that. But the Sharks really needed this, I think. Someone in the middle to step up. They've got all the firepower in the outside backs and in the halves. How do we see Adam Fanua-Blake's fantasy game coming over to the Sharkies, Scoop?
I think we're going to see the similar play style. We've seen the last probably year and a half, especially him just develop into that absolute wrecking ball that we've seen the potential for there to be. The question is how much, how many minutes, how will the pack rotate? Because we had guys like Catewell in the Warriors outfit, which didn't usually play 80, bench shifted a little bit. But then again, there aren't a huge deal of dudes who are demanding 50, 60 minutes in the middle all the time, other than maybe McInnes. So there's potential that he could do, I don't know, 55, 60 minutes and get a 60 average, or maybe he slides back a couple points. I don't think he'll move too much from where he is. I think he's going to be a very good option. But yeah, another one where the role's a little bit uncertain, I'm probably going to watch, especially with guys like Yo dominating the end of last year. Especially if Cleary's not fit, I'd say one of those guys will probably get a go. And yeah, so I'm probably not as high on him as I am high on a couple of other middles, especially some that are a little bit cheaper and have got more guaranteed value.
Yeah, that makes sense. He was a guy that we probably faded or look a few people looked to fade anyway at the beginning of the season because he scored so many tries. And then he was one of those consistent guys to start the season. He had that little lull through the middle before, raging in the back half of the season. So yeah, you could probably pick any of those middles and do fine. It probably comes down to, do you like watching him play over another guy, or is it slightly cheaper than going a Haas or a Yo or something like that that maybe sways you to go to an Adam Fanua Blake, or that beautiful buy schedule to begin the season and playing, round 12 and 15 are two major buys. So it's a very interesting one at that. Heath, what are your thoughts on the forward pack in general in the middles?
I think AFB probably scares me off any of them, really. I think there's just a lot of minutes to go around. And as I've said, although we lose Reece Hunt and Jack Williams, they weren't necessarily big minute forwards. And I think he can probably eat all theirs up, plus possibly some of our other forwards as well, too. And even our props last year, there was a bit of a rotation with Kafusi and Hazelton finding a bit of favour over players like Rudolph, Hemlin, Ueli's come off a big year of injuries and a couple of knee reconstructions and injuries. So, yeah, it's tricky. I think you need to watch and see before you make any decisions on it.
Yeah, I agree there. I think you've got the minutes pretty well spot on there. Scoot with, yeah, even McInnes, he may fade down to like a 50 or something like that, but Hazelton was massive. Kafusi, yeah, he could probably sit between that 35 and 40, and Hazelton, I think, improves each and every year on his quality of play. But Corey, how do you think AFB coming over affects Cam McInnes? Do we see him scoring about the same or maybe a little bit of a drop?
That's a good question. I don't know so much about McInnes, but I just think if you're spending the money like AFB is asking, I think you've got to give him some minutes. Like you can't spend that sort of cash and not have somebody like that on the field for as long as you can have him on the field. I think his minutes will be really similar to last year, and then it'll just be a shuffle between the bench forwards, and they might even shuffle in with McInnes.
Hmm. Yeah, AFB, that makes sense. 100%. You're paying all that money to bring him over, then yeah, you wouldn't expect anything less than 50, and it's more that 55 to
Yeah.
60, which we know he's got the motor for, which is nice to see, and we've seen that with guys like Payne Haas. It's you're paying that much money for him. They should be on the park, especially when we see there are guys like Yo, there are guys like Pat Carrigan that have that motor, but he's a slightly bigger boy, I suppose, than what Yo is. That's for sure. Do we have to say too much about our hooker and Blake Brayley? Are we ever going to see him miss a game? I hope not for his sake, but it's wild his durability.
Poor,
Mr.
poor old Jaden
Consistent.
Burrell. Poor old Jaden Burrell is going to turn into like a Stuart McGill or a Scott Boland. He's just
Yeah.
going to be the one great guy that was a what if at this rate. So, yeah, I don't see much difference for Brayley. He's scored, I looked at the last few years, I think he scored within 5 points of 45 for the last half a decade. So I don't see too much change.
What are you going to say, Heath?
I was just saying, Mr. Consistent. He just goes out there and yeah, the scores always just you see the tackles add up, and he's always sitting just around that 50. Sometimes he does get a few extras. He'll have that sort of couple of explosion games for tackles every now and again, but law of averages, he just sits around that same sort of score.
Yeah.
Only comes in around big buys where maybe you're down a few gun hookers and maybe he's sort of the best available.
He seems to be improving year on year too. It doesn't seem to show too much in the fantasy scores. Like he'll have that game where like, oh wow, he's really taken a step, took some kicks, he ran the footy a bit, and then the next game he just makes like 30 tackles and misses six and doesn't really run the footy. And it's like, oh, he gets 25. Cool. Like he's just one of those guys. So not super fantasy relevant. But Corey, give us a little bit of your thoughts on Britton Nickera. Averaged 52 last year, and I've missed him the last couple of years. So to me, he feels like a guy that you buy when he gets cheaper, inevitably. Seems to have that up and down type of situation. Did you own him last year?
No, I've actually never owned Nickera for the same reason. I've always either missed his hot runs or, a number of reasons. I've had other edges that were more consistent that I was happy with, like Ali. But I've never owned him, but yeah, I'll definitely always keep an eye on him and wait when he goes on those hot runs. He's always very tempting. He drops a heap of cash and then tends to play like out of his skin for a few games. So I might try and jump on one of those runs this year if I get a chance.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like he can look really poor and misses a lot of tackles and stuff. Heath, is there anything you can see in his game to be like, oh, he's back on now? Because he seems to go in and out of, yeah, he have 3 weeks of looking terrible, and then he looks like the best player in the game. Can you see it in game for you?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I watch him every week, and even I struggle to catch those hot streaks sometimes.
Mm.
Sometimes it does tend to be on the back of Hynes. I think those two work really well together when he's catching that short ball. When he looks to like sort of cut back inside, he'll sort of go through a few weeks where he's just hitting that, catching it regularly, going over the try line.
Mm.
And then the next couple of weeks, they're just bouncing off the chest, off the shoulder, and he's just dropping them, and the confidence drops, and that's when he
Mm.
misses all the tackles, and he's just value changes a lot. So he's one to watch throughout the season, but I think he's more of a super coach player with his try scoring ability and sort of the lower base stats from time to time.
Yeah, that's when you see the swings for sure. Like I think we got
Mm.
him close to a 42 or 43 average last year in fantasy, and he ended up probably averaging close to 55 for the remainder of the year, which was massive. But yeah, Supercoach was like a 30 into a average 80 for the rest of the year. Like it was crazy. But Scoop, there, looking at both of those edges, what are your thoughts on Britain and then with Teague Wilton on the other side?
I'm interested to see how Teague goes because I think the year before he averaged about 50. And if he stays on the park plays 80, he'll be that sort of guy. He'll probably average sort of mid to high 40s. Don't see tons and tons of value in him or Nickera, to be honest. But I think you're dead on with the comments before. I think Nickera is a confidence player and also feeds off whoever's feeding the ball. Brayley improving the last few years, feeding him short balls, Hynes or Trindle feeding him short balls. When that works, he scores 70s and 80s and 60s for a month. And you go, oh, why did I not pick him up? Yeah. So I think if the Sharks lock in and get that sorted, I think he'll have another very good year, potentially higher average than he did this year. Maybe gets that consistency. But if they don't, yeah, he'll be up and down, and maybe we'll get him at 600K or below, like we did last year. Me personally owning Nickera, last year is the first time I actually owned him and enjoyed it because the last 2 years I've had him when he wasn't good and then sold him just before he went
Yeah.
on those runs. So we'll see
Yeah.
how it goes this year.
That's definitely gross. Wilton, very interesting. He was one of those guys coming back from injury last year. He started pretty poor, and he seemed to in the back month, and then those couple of finals games that they played, he went on a tear, and he was well into the 50s. Do we see that as a coming back from injury, plus the fact that it was a bit more Trindle ball on that left hand side, and like defensively he looked a lot stronger, and then in attack him, Iro. Mulatalo, those guys really benefit on that side. What do you think there, Heath?
I think that Trindle. So I definitely played into it a little bit. As I said, I was surprised with how many minutes he had coming back from the injury with his score. I thought maybe he might be a little bit lower because of that, but he was at nearly 75 minutes, and he's sort of got that best case scenario with Talakai sitting there on the bench, I think.
Mm.
He was about just below 50, so 48.9 in 2023 if you take out his injury game, which means there could be around 5 points of value there. But maybe look for a little drop first. I think there's probably better options to start with.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to see what pops up in the edge position across the preseason, just for sure. I had a look just before 56 days until game one, so it's under 2 months. We're getting excited, and we may only have a game for about 40 days of it. So we'll be flat chatting in sorting all this out, that's for sure. But it's good to see we have most of the squads uh pretty well set and forget, which is nice. And we can work all that out from here. But yeah, the bench kind of picks itself. There's no real value there. Is there any sort of final thoughts on McInnes there, Heath?
Nah, he's he's Mr. Consistent. Not in terms of scoring week to week. He's very up and down with that. But like his yearly scores, I went back. He's 52.3, 51.2, 51.3. So And I think with the minutes risk there, he's just a player you sit there and watch and enjoy, and maybe try and catch him at the right time throughout the year.
Mm. Yeah, if they
Enjoy that
decide to,
beautiful face of his.
oh, gets prettier and prettier every week, that's for sure.
Exactly.
I suppose,
always cut, always busted at the end of the game somehow.
or at the start, essentially like first tackle or something, he just nicks something that he's already hurt. But I suppose
Out and taping him up.
yeah. I suppose the big thing might be the fullback slot. There's been a bit of talk around Will Kennedy, and does he keep the spot, or do they bring in one of the young guns? What are your thoughts on him, Heath? And obviously, if we do get a young gun, he'll be straight into our sides as well. But yeah, how do you think Will's going to go this year? Does he keep his spot?
It's interesting. He does seem to be a bit of a key target in some of like the Cronulla Sharks groups I'm in. They do seem to be
Yeah.
actually quite a few people suggesting Nico go back there. Last year they wanted Atkinson and Trindle to play in the halves and Nico to go back. I personally love him. I think he's a reincarnation of Peachy, and I think he's one of the best ball players. I think maybe he lacks a little bit in terms of his ball running or defense, and then can have those games where he just seems to drop it all the time. But him seems to complement Nico and Trindle out the back so well, and I think that will really, the Cronulla Sharks start to the year will determine whether Ison, I think, is the one they're saying might come in, possibly Stone Street to come in on a wing as well too, and maybe try one of the other fellas back there. But yeah, I think he's probably the biggest risk in our squad and maybe the biggest what if. But I think he'll definitely be there to start the year.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Give him the start and see how it goes, because I agree. He was great a couple of years ago. He's probably just been a little bit out of sorts the last two, in a team that has taken the next level, I suppose. And he was probably one of the leaders of that. And now he's probably hasn't improved and probably gone back a bit, and everyone else has improved. So yeah, we've got some interest at that fullback slot. The outside backs is probably a bit tough to see much value. We've got guys that play a lot of games. It's a lot of durability. You got Stone Street on that wing. You've got Talakai can come into the centers if there's an injury there. In the halves, that could be interesting. But you do have Atkinson, and he could be that guy. Plenty of middle forwards, edges again. If you lose someone, Talakai comes in. So it's probably more just around that 9 position and then if Atkinson becomes an interesting buy as a potential options waiting in the wings. Is that probably all you've got there, Heath?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's too much changing with our squad for this year. I think it's very much AFB is the big addition and just improving on what we've got there. I imagine that they've had a pretty busy pre-season and just getting the system down, maybe a bit more defensive again, and they're in good hands with Craig Fitzgibbon. I think we should be good in top 4 again and hopefully improve on last year, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And not coming into this season with any injury worries either, right?
Yeah. So we had Nico go down last year. Rudolph might have been one in the pre-season last year too. So far, nothing, I don't think. So fingers crossed. As you said, there's still, 56 days, so you never know. But if something does happen like that, then maybe there's a little bit more interest. Talakai is probably the biggest one, can explode throughout the year if he does get that starting role, but didn't really pop up last year. Maybe more of an older thing.
He still averaged 30 off the bench, basically. He had a couple of starts at the beginning of the year, so yeah, he doesn't even come in with a massive discount anyway, or 10 points or so, but he'd be interesting for sure. But mate, Scoop, any final words on this Shark setup?
I think they're going to be, as they are for a few years, a team to load up on at the end, like your Nicoras, your Fanil Blakes, your Hynes, once we figure out what's going on with this team. So there could be 3 or 4 of those guys in our final team, and I would be happy with that. But yeah, probably not going to start with any of them. But yeah, especially watch on the guys like Nicro to go up and down, because they can still be final team guns, but might drop in price at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Anything for yourself, Corey?
I read an article a couple of days ago saying that Rudolph might also be missing the first few weeks of the season due to
Mm.
injury in the off season. I'm not sure what that's all about, but I haven't heard too much else about it. So that could even shuffle up the bench again before it even kicks off.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think I read
Mm.
something as well about that one, but yeah, as I said, it won't shouldn't change too much, should it? So there you go. We'll leave it at that, guys. Thanks so much for jumping on. Let us know in the comments what you thought of having the four of us on here. We might have other videos where it's two or three, or I might not be on there. We'll mix it up in the preseason, especially early on, just to give everyone a crack. And we will see these guys on the channel regularly throughout the season, so we can get more content out to you guys, more different opinions. We've got these guys here did really really well last season. Just a quick check, Heath, how'd you end up last year?
I think I was 600s, and I bailed on overall final buy because I had drifted out from 2000 to about 5000 and sort of locked into Latrell and a Payne Haas. So could have done a little bit better if I had stuck with it. So, but came third in the knockout comp, so it still sort of worked out for me.
That's right. He came
Hence the
came
jumper.
came home strong. Yeah, there he goes. Yeah, so we've got everyone on here is really really good, knows what they're talking about and knows the strategy. So once we get into that, you'll see these guys more and more, which is awesome. Just so we can not just hearing my thoughts on every single video, I can really specify it into certain videos and give these guys some more time in the private group as well. So as I said, if you are interested in that, all the info is in the description. And thanks boys for coming on. We'll see you all in the next video.